Hey Josh, is saying yes bad advice?
Yes. No. Yeah. Some maybe sometime yeah. Yes. Sometimes yes.
Maybe we should talk about that.
Yes. So Jake, our last two videos on this channel, we went over two topics: the challenge rating system and a sort of DM shortage. Briefly, in both of those videos, we touched on this concept of saying yes. And I think that it's really fun to say yes. It's really fun to say yes and let your players try some things and do some interesting, cool, creative moments and actions. But if you do it too much and if you take it to an extreme, I think it can severely hurt your game and damage your game worlds and your players' fun and all of that. So I guess what I want to ask you is, should you always say yes?
It's a good question because I think it loses its value if you say it too often. So you have to find that balance. And speaking of balance, it kind of reminded me of the Jim Carrey movie Yes Man. So this is a story about a guy who just never does anything with his life. And in a lot of ways, I kind of relate that to my own DM journey a bit. I used to just be like, these are the rules, blah, 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 blah. You will stay in the color in lines, you rotten, dirty players. And it was this kind of thing where I needed to learn the value of it. So for me, I had to start saying yes more often in order to get it right. But I think a lot of dungeon masters, particularly ones that maybe they got exposed to the game through watching fun content like maybe Dimension 20 or Critical Role or Ancient Relics and Hokey Religions, and they just think like, yes, I'm supposed to say yes to everything, and it's like that they're on that side of it, and they need to realize, okay, easy. You have to understand there's consequences sometimes to saying yes to things that get out of hand. And for the record, I mean, Josh, you and I, we love saying yes. It's one of those things. It's like it's right there with the rule of cool. It can make your players feel powerful, awesome, competent. Don't ever underestimate making your players feel like their characters are competent.
Yeah, I think going with the flow and letting your players try things can make for some awesome creative moments in your games. The problem just really exists when you hit like an irresponsible level of your usage of yes and yes and. Once you get to that irresponsible kind of excessive use, it really will. I personally don't think I'm exaggerating when I say this. It can completely destroy your campaign. It can completely destroy your campaign setting and your world, and it can completely destroy and erase everyone's fun. I'm gonna go off on a small tangent. I compare it to Skyrim. Everybody knows, not maybe not everybody knows. A lot of
Oh
you know that
boy.
I am a I'm an outspoken, infamous hater, quote unquote, of Skyrim. I don't hate it, but that's a story for another time. To an extent, there's a very surface level experience, and the reason for that is because you can say yes to everything. I'm just going to talk about one specific instance, and it's the organizations that you could join. You could join an organization and just pop up and keep climbing the ranks. And most of the time, when you get to that top level, you find out that there's some sort of god or deity or whatever who is actually in control of things. And to advance to the highest level, you usually end up having to like sell your soul to that deity or something along those lines. Say like the hunt. But then you travel down, you join the Thieves Guild or the Mages Guild or whatever, and you start climbing the ranks through that group. And even though you're already owned by the hunt, now you also have sold yourself to all of these other different deities, and it's like it just doesn't make sense. There's no continuity. It's surface level. The two people can't own that part of
Like
you.
let them figure it out. It's fine.
Yeah,
Just like
exactly.
okay.
I think that's just kind of an example for me where if you just keep saying yes, it feels surface level. It feels pointless. It feels like things just don't really matter. There's no
Yeah.
continuity in your campaign setting in your game world, and I like things to matter.
Yeah,
People
it
get
loses
mad at
its
me
meaning.
for yeah. People get mad at me and probably for most of you too for taking fictional worlds too seriously, and like when one thing doesn't make sense, you're like, well, they're space wizards with laser swords, and you're like, yeah, but like once the world sets like a rule, and this is how
Exactly.
things work. When they go against that, it feels like the whole thing is just soiled. You know, there's just something that's taken away from it. And I
Well,
think
the story
that
loses
excessive yes.
credibility.
Exactly.
And you don't want to do that. You spend time building the world, and the players interact with the world for a reason, and you build this thing, and if you say yes the wrong way, you can just chop all of that out from underneath, and now you're sitting there with like, well, okay, now I guess this dragon guild that we just infiltrated has been overthrown by the Easter Bunny and Santa Claus tag teaming, and you're like, no, it's just because I said yes to something. I don't know. It can get wonky. It can get real wonky.
It is a nice thing to say and a nice thing to do, but if you see that advice, unless that advice is followed up with like how you should do it, it really is pretty bad advice. So all of that being said, I think the game rules and the structure, they are specifically designed to help keep your game running smoothly. So if that's the case, Jake, when should we say yes?
Well, I think the first thing you could look at, Josh, is if there is a rule that specifically says no to the thing that you're being asked to say yes to.
That is a good starting point.
Yeah, if you're going to use 5e is obviously the most easily and common thing. You can't cast 2-leveled spells in a turn. You can't concentrate on 2 spells at a time. I threw this one in there. I don't know if Josh noticed, but you can't use acrobatics to climb. That's not the same as dexterity, by the way. We have a little rant about that. You want to talk about that? Let us know in the comment section. But technically, there is a rule there that says it's something else. Now, obviously, I threw that in there just to be a bit of a scutch, but I think that's a really good starting point. And that was actually the DM, my friend Matt, who taught me how to say yes properly. That was usually kind of like almost like the only way you would say no. That might not necessarily be true. And Matt, if you watch this, please let us know in the comment section. But that usually was his like first go-to. Like if something says no specifically in the rules, it's probably there for like a balance reason, or like it's probably important that it's there.
Yeah.
And overriding that is a little more significant than some other stuff.
And I think for the does a specific rule, like say no, that kind of thing, some DMs might fall into like a rules as written versus rules as intended kind of thing. And that's something that we could really, I don't know if there's a lot to go in on that, but it's definitely a topic for another time if you want us to talk about it. So let us know in the comments if you want us to go over that, but play rules as intended. I'm just going to say that.
And the next thing I might look at is if you say yes to this player request, or no, really. I mean, but they could go either way. But is saying yes to this request going to somehow remove a player's agency over the game? And that could be the player that's asking, or it could be another player at the table. You can't forget about them too. I mean, maybe your sorcerer is like, I want to use my bonus action to disengage. And it's like, well, you're not a rogue. Like there's something there that's important. And the rogue that's sitting there might be like, you can't. This is part of what makes my character special. There's going to be something there that's like, this isn't, I don't know. There's a disconnect there that's removing a part of what makes the game special. Don't do it.
I think that happens a lot when you have the one player at the table who is always asking for things, and maybe another player who's just going to do my thing and play the way it's supposed to be played. There could be some resentment that's created there if you just constantly say yes to this one player, and now they're getting all these cool, crazy things, and there's all these house rules for just the one player.
Like the DM is favoring their significant other.
Yeah. And it might not even be that the DM is favoring a specific player over another, but if you're that player that's just constantly asking for, can I do this? Can I do that? Can I do this? And like you're saying yes to them, it's gonna build up. It might seem that way to other players who maybe aren't as bold or familiar with the rules or creative. And I don't know. I just be wary of that. It is also their responsibility to tell you how they feel, but try to be wary of that too.
Another good one I think is just good for basically any TTRPG is, does the request even make sense? Is common sense that common? Not always with players, but sometimes players forget that the dungeon master has more information at their disposal than they do. And so sometimes something might sound completely logical to them, makes total sense. I don't understand why you're not letting me do this. It's just like, well, you're going to have to trust me because I have to say no to this request.
And on the flip side, I think that does it make sense kind of ties into does a specific rule say no, right? Because all of these, none of these are, maybe not none of them, but a lot of these are situational. Sometimes there is a rule that just straight up does not make sense. My rule of thumb for that, whether you're changing a rule or whether you're just making a house rule or whatever you're doing, if the answer is yes, let's do that. And that's a precedent moving forward. That is now a house rule for your game, because kind of for what we were talking about a moment ago, when you have that second player that wants to do something, you said yes to the first one, and now because the context changed, the situation changed, now you want to say no. Got to be consistent. So if you say yes once, they're going to expect you to say yes the second time.
Yes.
Something to be aware of.
It's true. If you're going to set a precedent, and if you're really not sure, you'd be like, I'm going to say yes right now, but then I'm going to look into it a little bit more in between sessions, and then you can talk about it. And that's a great way to, need a moment, chew it over with Twix kind of a thing. I'm going to say yes right now, but I reserve the right to change my mind in the future, just so everybody knows. Good go-to.
Or the reverse. Say no right now, and then think about it. Either
we'll
of those.
Review it in the future. It's a communication game more than anything else. Another reason why you actually might want to say yes is if the request is kind of fun and like just kind of inconsequential, like maybe it's like mostly flavor. So a good example I think might be the old Killing Blow description. I want to do a 360 no scope. It's like, yeah, you nailed it. Like, I want to do a weird backflip off the balcony, land. It's like, okay, you had enough movement to reach the square. It's fine. That sounds really cool. I might not even make you roll an acrobatics check just because that just sounds like it would be a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Does that set anything? Yeah. Does that change anything other than just this is just a cool memory to have?
Mm-hmm.
That's
yeah.
it.
Even if they want to describe one hit as 5, or they want to describe they tried to hit me and I deflected it or whatever, even though that didn't happen. You're not hurting your game. You're not. It's just a description. That's all it is, and that's okay. Let players feel cool.
Basically, the whole gist of it is also like if you just kind of get this sense that maybe your players are trying to take advantage of your good nature, like they're just like, hey, I know you're going to say yes to this thing. That's a thing. We'll just keep throwing it at you. Because a lot of players, they find joy in just like pushing buttons a little bit, get a little rise out of you maybe in a way. And maybe they'll purposely try the craziest things and just get things going their way. Another way that people will try to push boundaries is in weird uses of skill checks. And so we've got a whole video dedicated to that to help you handle those, as well as a video on the 7 healthy attributes of a game of Dungeons & Dragons. They're both good choices. You have agency as to which one you watch next.